So this panel is designed to explore what we do in a world post-Micron, not necessarily because of Micron itself, but the byproduct of the economic optimism that comes with it. And a message that has been repeated at the Onondaga County Planning Federation and in the planning literature that we have seen probably for the past decade is that when we run on default, the American way is to reduce sprawl in a metropolitan area. So we're going to talk about sprawl and the infill development. So it's going to be a bit back and forth between what happens outside the city and inside the city. And with that, I'll introduce my moderator, Nazanin Ghaffari.
Thank you, Javier. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Nazanin Ghaffari. I'm an assistant professor. Oh, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Nazanin Ghaffari. I'm an assistant professor of place and community-based planning and design in the Department of Landscape Architecture at SUNY ESF. And I'm so excited. I can hear myself. Yeah, so I'm so excited for this event and this conversation, and I look forward to your questions as well. I have an eye on your questions. You can pose your questions as well. We have an esteemed panelist here, and they are bringing unique insights and perspectives from across sectors as well as across expertise level. So we are so excited with this. I'm moving this to the panelists to introduce themselves and then start the conversation.
There we go. Hi, my name is Megan Costa. I am a planner with the Onondaga County Department of Planning. We work with county departments, municipalities, different agencies throughout the county on a variety of different planning projects and initiatives. We staff the county's planning board, which looks at about 500 or 600 planning referrals from all the municipalities throughout the course of a year. We provide training to municipal planning and zoning board members, which also numbers in the 500 range. When you take into consideration planning boards, zoning boards, municipal boards. Those are the folks that are actually really making a lot of the planning decisions here in our communities, so educating them is pretty important. And then we have a whole program centered around our county comprehensive plan, Plan Onondaga, that focuses on 5 different thematic program areas. We've got strong centers, agriculture, community mobility, greenways and blueways, and housing and neighborhoods. So we've got different initiatives going on in each one of those program areas. And that's the brunt of the work that we do in our department, as well as mapping and GIS and address administration work too.
Hello. Oh, guess I'm a little too close. I'm Joe Driscoll. I'm the city's ID1 project director. The title is a little misleading, but the project is very much being directed by the New York State DOT, Department of Transportation. But what I do is look after all the city's interests on the project. So, you know, the city's community grid vision plan was something I actively helped navigate with Dover Coal. Going back and forth between the state and all the different agencies that interact with the project, and then really looking after everything else that's going to be necessary for a connected new urban Syracuse post the viaducts removal. So looking after bike lanes, pedestrian infrastructure, crosswalks, a lot of things, just advocating for the best version of the highway that we can get, and collaborating with a load of different partners and making sure that there's no silos on the project. Also working on a lot of different grants. Currently about to start the process for the Reconnecting Communities Planning Grant. We're deciding on that, which will look at connectivity for the south side and the university in the downtown area, as well as the Reconnecting Communities Capital Grant, which was an $180 million grant that the city won, that I was a part of the grant team. And yeah, that's a lot. And currently working on a community change grant, which is due in a couple of days. That's driving me crazy. But yeah, that's generally what my gig is.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Drake. I'm an assistant professor of sociology in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. I'm also a senior research associate in the Maxwell Center for Policy Research and a faculty fellow at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. My research and teaching focus on sociology of race and ethnicity, sociology of education, and the sociology of immigration. I specifically study neighborhood and school segregation, neighborhood organization inequality, pathways of incorporation for new Americans. I wrote a book called Academic Apartheid, which came out a couple of years ago on University of California Press. It's a study of school segregation in suburban districts, hidden mechanisms of inequality in those districts. I'm currently working on another book project focused on refugee youth and families in the Rust Belt, particularly their adjustment to the education systems in the neighborhoods in which they're resettled. And I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Fitzgerald. I'm the market manager for Salt City Harvest Farm, a 501c3 nonprofit organization working to grow food culture and community through the cross-cultural exchange of food traditions. We are a little bit of an outgrowth of the Syracuse Growth Initiative. We started in 2012 doing community gardens, eventually transferred to about 4 acres of land out in Kirkville, New York. My position kind of coordinates our community-supported agriculture, our market stand at the CNY regional market, doing wholesale contracts and helping our farmers get connected to existing markets, and really just hammer out some wholesale contracts and get them some deals. I also help oversee some grant funding that was provided to us from the New York Department of Ag and Markets, where we get to pay our farmers market rate for them to grow food that we deliver directly to food pantries. This year alone we did, watch out, there's going to be a little bit of feedback. You just got to this year we did alone, I think, 4,000 bunches of collard greens, a couple hundred pounds of radish that we just were able to take right to some folks in town. We're really hitting our stride, moving from, small 1/8 acre plots, hopefully looking forward to getting some longer term land tenure and being able to really start building up a food hub and get some more hyper-local produce out to the community and out to folks in Syracuse and in Onondaga County generally.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Well, thanks very much for having me. Really thrilled to be a part of this panel today. So my name is Eric Ennis. I serve as Deputy Commissioner in the city's Department of Neighborhood and Business Development. And we're all still feeling out the mics here, I think. So as part of my role within NBD within the city is really overseeing the economic development and business development side of the role and everything that the city is a part of. I serve and staff in a couple of different public authorities that the city operates and leads. That includes the city's revolving loan fund, which is SEDCO. That stands for the Syracuse Economic Development Corporation. That is a revolving loan fund that provides low interest loan financing to small businesses and entrepreneurs here in the city. Also serve as Executive Director of the Syracuse Industrial Development Agency, which is SIDA. That provides tax abatements and tax exemptions to large-scale real estate development projects and redevelopments happening here within the city. And then aside from that, just continuing to work closely on a number of different city initiatives, work closely with Joe Driscoll here as well on different infrastructure projects and key major investments such as I-81. So really pleased to be a part of the panel today and looking forward to getting started.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with a question that I'll direct it to everyone on the panel. I'm wondering how you all think about it. Syracuse has experienced cycles of industrialization, deindustrialization, and this new wave of reindustrialization. And I wanted to know, how do these cycles impact current development strategies, or should impact the current development strategies, and what specific economic and social challenges must be addressed to avoid repeating the mistakes?
That's a really big question. Thanks. Thanks for the heads up on that one. Yeah, so we've obviously seen some of the results of industrialization and then deindustrialization. So I think the key is not repeating the patterns of the past. We've seen with rapid industrialization and housing growth that we've expanded the urban reach of our community. We got into a pattern of suburban sprawl, and we've learned a lot from that pattern about what's good and bad about that. And I think right now we're in the process of trying to right some of those wrongs and sort of self-correct and bring ourselves back on course to what we've now learned are better patterns of development focused around smart growth and strong centers and complete communities and things like that. And sort of going back to where we started, about the value of cities and villages and the urban form that comes with all of that. So I think the challenge to us as we welcome a new wave of housing growth in all of our communities is to try and take those lessons that we learned over the past 50 years of sprawl without growth and apply them and really be ready to welcome new development, but do it in a way that's adding quality to our communities and not detracting from our efficiency, our competitiveness, and sort of shooting ourselves in the foot from one geography to another, which I think is something that we've done. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity. I've been planning for sort of stagnant growth for 20 years of my career, so this is a really exciting time for me. I've never planned for growth. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that. You know, as Syracuse, as long as I've been alive, has been in the deindustrialization phase of its cycle. So it's tremendously exciting. But I think, you know, a lot of my experience was informed by living. I lived in England and France for a while, for a little over a decade, and lived without a vehicle all that time and lived very comfortably. And I think a lot of the things that made that possible are very high on our to-do list right now in the region. I think BRT that you heard about from Bren in the last one, having a decent public transportation system that can get folks in Onondaga County and Syracuse around will play a huge role. And really looking out for design that we can build on as far as making this, you know, I've encountered a bunch of my friends who even around my age who have moved from the suburbs back into the city because they like being able to walk to a cafe in the morning and walk to a restaurant and leaving their car in the garage. So I think we just really have to lean into that more and more and just kind of design for, you know, I think the mistakes of the past were really just building in a way that required and necessitated a certain level of population in order for it to work. And I think kind of the trips I've taken to Rochester and seen the inner loop and the removal of their highway and the increase in walkability and bikeability really has been an example that we can learn from. And so I'm personally, as noted, very excited for this next phase of Syracuse's first growth in 70 years, I think it is, that we've had the first time we've seen growth. So looking forward to more. And I think we got a lot of the big ticket items to make that happen in a way that's sustainable.
So I'll keep this one pretty short and sweet, but I think any development, business development, new communities has to be attached to affordable housing, transportation, investment in public education, and jobs programs. So you have to have those four things. And if you don't have all four, you need to have three of them. And if you don't have three, then you're in trouble. So all of them are really important. And yeah, I mean, I can say a lot more about that, but those four things: affordable housing, transportation, public education, and jobs programs are really crucial.
I'm just going to make a quick comment that's in my wheelhouse. The one thing that kind of always comes to mind with the development is how is it going to change the water cycle, the water table. Onondaga County and Onondaga Lake and Syracuse have experienced really significant pollution in the area with, the rise of industry and with deindustrialization. So I just always want to be aware of the history that got us here and what that kind of sets the stage for as we're looking for greater industrialization, just to keep an eye, ear, and attention on what's going on with the water, how much of it's going to be contaminated, what kind of contaminants we're looking at, and just really be aware that you got to drink a lot of water every day. You can't go without it for more than 4 days. So just keep good attention on that. It's something I'm always worried about because plants drink it, we drink it, everything needs it.
I think to your question, as we think about where the city of Syracuse and where central New York goes from here, as we are on the precipice of so much growth here, I think about the mindset and the cultural shift maybe from where we are decades ago, right? As the city of Syracuse was shrinking in population, central New York as a whole, and as was remaining largely stagnant, I think the mindset was any development is good development. And it could be any type of, it could be anything from like a franchise, like a Dunkin' Donuts or a Walgreens comes in, they want to bring in a pharmacy or a restaurant or a fast food service store, and they would put the suburban style design that did not fit the character of that neighborhood. It did not fit the character of this high traffic corridor where there was density dating back decades ago, and that simply isn't being maintained with this design. And I will say I wasn't with the city during some of these periods when these sites were being negotiated or developed, but you can imagine how a city might feel like it has less leverage to be able to make these projects happen, and the company might say, well, we'll just pick up business and go down the street or to the next town. I think now the city of Syracuse is in a unique position. We know there's an opportunity to leverage growth, and we know there's companies that want to be here, and there's projects that are being proposed. And I think for colleagues, for Joe, myself, is that we're not just looking at how do we make these projects happen, but how do we really achieve the best possible design. And so, I think that where it in the past was maybe you had this any development is good development mentality. I think that's shifted now. It's not just any development is good. It needs to be high quality. It needs to be serving the residents and serving our community while supporting our economic development goals. I think the points that Dr. Drake just raised are also really critical, is that it's more just the brick and mortar. It's more just the investment. It's what does it do to the surrounding neighborhood, the surrounding residents? Are there opportunities being created for the people who live and will ultimately be impacted by these projects? So I think it's a mindset shift. I think culturally, It's not just a city government or a town government or a county government that needs to be advocating, but I think it's also really helpful when the community wants to see high quality design as well. And I think examples like this conference and this gathering here today is we all should be thinking more in a high quality design and urban mindset. So thanks.
So much. Incredible discussion started. I feel like maybe I can direct this to you, Megan, and discussing how the suburban sprawl has carried substantial and will carry substantial fiscal and environmental impact and different costs to our region. How does Onondaga County communicates these impacts to municipal leaders, and what are the alternative planning processes in place?
Okay. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time about 10 years ago looking at the fiscal impacts of development patterns and really trying to educate municipalities about those factors. And there were some interesting tidbits that we took out of that. And just to provide some context to it, single-family development is basically a drain on a community's tax base for the most part. Yeah, commercial industrial development is a plus. Multifamily development gets you closer. A lot of times it has to do with school taxes. Obviously, commercial industrial don't demand anything of their school taxes. Single family development and multifamily development do. But also, so it's basically about use, and then it's about density. So, and from a use perspective, residential is a loser from a property tax standpoint. Commercial, industrial, agricultural development is a winner. So understanding that, you can start to play around with that. But the other factor is we have to put in housing, so you can't just say no to housing. So then you start looking at density. So there's a couple different ways to sort of offset those costs of housing in your communities. A is to develop more densely, so really welcoming in a more dense development pattern that brings down your cost of delivery of services. It takes up less land mass to put in an apartment project or a smaller multifamily project than it would for all the land that it takes and infrastructure that it takes to serve a residential subdivision, for example. So you're saving on infrastructure costs, you're saving on land costs. Provision of services is not just the infrastructure on the ground, it's how far do your police and fire services have to go, your school buses, your EMS, your trash service, all of that kind of stuff. So once you take all of those costs of spread out development and add them together, you're really at a disadvantage in a sprawl type of pattern. So ways to offset that, get back to that point, ways to offset it is develop more densely, develop with a mix of uses, so incorporating the moneymakers, the commercial industrial in with your housing developments, and that's what we call mixed use development. Yeah, and then yeah, or the third option, which we weren't the biggest fans of, but a lot of our suburban communities were fans of, the third option is build housing units that are expensive enough that they can offset their costs from municipalities. So back 10 years ago, you needed to build a $350,000 housing unit to bring in enough property taxes to offset the costs of your unit. So yeah, somehow the message that was received by municipalities was build a lot of McMansions. That wasn't really what we were going for. But we also did sort of a modeling exercise to talk about the fiscal impacts of sort of development patterns as part of a previous planning exercise we did. And we sort of modeled like a business as usual pattern of growth versus a smart growth pattern. So sort of sprawl versus compact development, kind of infill development kind of pattern. And we compared that against some of our other community values that we've been hearing in planning discussions and community surveys and things like how much driving are we doing? How much emissions do we have? How much open space are we consuming? How much ag land do we have in our communities? How close are we to parks and schools and neighborhoods and shops and things like that? And across the board, the sprawl pattern came out as a negative and the compact development pattern came out as a positive. So just sort of comparing it sort of fiscally and then comparing it from a values perspective, we learned a lot through just going through that exercise about what the different pros and cons of different development patterns are. And that's really provided some meaningful guidance for how we frame our planning program now and how we've been working with municipalities to try and understand some of those benefits that are inherent to certain development types and patterns and trying to spread that messaging.
So, leaning from Megan's point, I'm directing this to you, Eric, and I was wondering, so with this significant change that's coming to the region, how the city of Syracuse is kind of ensuring that growth strategies balance between economic opportunities and social development, sustainability, and inclusivity, and perhaps a discussion of how we can avoid the harm of displacement and gentrification that's always kind of go hand in hand with infill development and smart growth.
Sure. Well, I'll build off some of the points I think that Megan really made at a county-wide level. You know, land use is so critical and zoning is so critical, right? And I think some people you talk to and their eyes start to glaze over when you talk about zoning. I imagine this group in particular would be really interested in a topic like land use and zoning. And so when the city did successfully pass its zoning initiative as part of its Rezone Syracuse effort, which was years and years and years in the making in terms of refining that, you know, there was a major emphasis around additional density opportunities, neighborhood business corridors, which is something that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's part of the work that we do every day, making it more viable to do dense urban development on some of these high traffic corridors. We talked about on previous panels things like BRT, and so when we look at these corridors and you look at like the future of James Street in Eastwood or the future of South Ave, you know, these are going to be future BRT corridors. The ability to incorporate transit or transit-oriented development or TOD, I think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to boost for additional housing, additional mixed-use development, you know, the right types of commercial and business uses to be able to grow businesses. So land use and rezone and the new zoning ordinance passed by the city in 2023 is a really critical tool to be able to do that. I think there is an element too where design standards also are being taken into consideration. Again, just going back to my previous point about quality design. And then to your point, just really around displacement or really around what it means to have this type of new development. You know, I think that it really needs to be neighborhood level planning efforts in terms of not just being able to do a citywide planning effort. You know, we colleagues that I work very closely with, both with our neighborhood planning teams and with planning and sustainability, that are really trying to think through more at a granular level of what are the impacts of the future of these neighborhoods. We've employed a tool that we call our kitchen table talks, where there are direct conversations happening with city residents right across their tables and really right in people's homes, literally. So we take that kitchen table topic concept seriously. And so these are conversations about how do you envision the future of your neighborhood? What are services and amenities that you don't have in your neighborhood right now that you'd like to see? And while, you know, we are extremely bullish on the future of the city and really bullish on the opportunity of these large scale impacts and investments, we want to make sure that the people who have lived in these neighborhoods for years or currently are in these neighborhoods are not going to be displaced by this new development. So I think that that's where having the dialogue and understanding that when we are envisioning city neighborhoods, we're doing it with direct feedback from the people who live there today in mind. And I think the last point is that there are tools and there are resources that the city uses to try and leverage and create more opportunity. So I mentioned the Syracuse Industrial Development Agency. We've implemented a policy which was built based on a lot of feedback and a lot of community dialogue around city residency hiring, around supporting minority and women business enterprise or MWBE goals. And so there's a lot of ways that we are continuing to try and build our small business ecosystem and supporting new minority and women and BIPOC business, Black, Indigenous, people of color. There's a tremendous amount of effort that we're putting into to really diversify the development pool. Because traditionally, if you think about the real estate development industry, it was not and still is not a diverse industry. And so part of the work that we do is to help support particularly new emerging developers on how they're able to grow and develop the technical assistance to scale their projects. I will say that's an area where I think we still have a long way to go. Real estate development, it is not an easy area to break into, but also there's a lot of work and there's a lot of upfront investment that a developer needs to put in to successfully undertake a project. We have a lot of people that have great ideas, great designs, and great imagination for how a site can be developed. There's a lot of work and a lot of technical assistance that goes into that. So I think that that's one area, whereas we think we have stronger tools like zoning ordinance, like design, like zoning, but now it's how do we empower people to actually really kind of take advantage of this economic opportunity and take advantage of the development that we see coming. And I think that there's a big role that not just the city, but our community partners play a key role in that too. So I like to say that, this is not all just about Micron. I know that sucks up so much oxygen right now as we think about this region. But while the city is located maybe 12 miles to the south of Micron, our position has been how do we best position the city and poise the city to capitalize on that growth and for the people who live here, visit here, and do business here. So those are just, I know I listed off a few different tools, but the city has been working hard to really create this opportunity and make sure that we're ready and positioned for that growth.
So I wanted to bring this question to you, Sean, and ask, so most of the time, sometimes, I don't know, people kind of associate gentrification with adding more fundings to the school system. How do you envision, particularly based on your research, that it will impact our public education, and what should we do to protect our inner city communities as well?
Yeah, that's an important topic. There hasn't been a whole lot of research on the impact of gentrification on schools. It's more so been at the neighborhood level. So a lot of research is still being done to try to assess the impacts of gentrification. But I think that, displacing people from neighborhoods that they've been in for a long time obviously has, negative impacts on schools. We know enough to know that. Some have talked about how with gentrification you can have a higher property tax base that can fund public schools, but if you have people who used to attend those schools or families that are moving out, then they're not benefiting from the increased tax revenue for the district because they're no longer maybe even in the district or at that particular school. So I think that it's a challenging situation, but again, I think in this case, affordable housing is really important. So any new development has to come with affordable housing, and that can offset some of the effects of gentrification. So the example of like making sure that the housing costs were at a certain level to feed a tax base, like that gentrifies. Like that's kind of a gentrifying mechanism, and I think there's a lot of gentrification is a very racialized process. Often we talk about gentrification in terms of social class, but gentrification often displaces Black and brown people who are more likely to be economically disadvantaged. And so I think that we have to look at the racial impacts of gentrification as well when you are keeping when home prices are kept high or are put at a number in order to keep the tax base at a certain level. There's also some racial boundary work going on there where you're sort of, you're trying to kind of you're keeping neighborhoods segregated. And so I think we need to be very clear about the impacts, not just in terms of the socioeconomic inequality, but also the racial inequality, which is, and segregation, which is so much a part of this region. There have been school choice policies that have been put into place to try to deal with gentrifying neighborhoods, but they've been largely unsuccessful. The idea is that school choice, if you have a school choice system, then your address doesn't determine the quality of the education that you receive. That's part of the idea behind school choice, but it doesn't work that way. Most children end up going to school that looks just like their neighborhood school, or they just go to their neighborhood school because their first choice school is not very inconvenient to get to. They have to take 2 buses or walk really far, and it's not feasible. So school choice really hasn't moved the needle on segregation of schools in the face of gentrification. This is something that's been tried in New York City quite a bit. But it just hasn't worked very well. And so we also, along with affordable housing, need more investment in public education. So, I think those 2 things can offset some of the hit from gentrification. But it's a challenging question and situation, and we are still kind of collecting data on that and on some of those best practices.
You. So I have a comment that the surrounding noise is a lot, so please speak up. But I want also refer to this question here. How do we grow in a way that preserves rural land? And I'm going to ask this from you, but I prefer to also include discussions of protecting our farmers, protecting our agricultural land, how we can think about our water regimes or biodiversity in the region as well, if you can tell about that.
I guess a lot to approach on this question. So I guess for preserving farmland is the best way to preserve farmland is to get more beginning farmers and ranchers out into the field. USDA census in 2022 to determine that the average age of a farmer in the United States is 58 years old. The majority of farmers, especially those managing large acreages, but a lot of farmers in the sector are aging out of it. They have family that aren't interested in it. They don't have a succession plan. So a lot of USDA planning is now kind of geared towards succession planning. So our organization, just as an example, focuses on providing land access opportunities for refugees, immigrants, and new Americans in the region. So we have, Syracuse is really lucky as a resettlement city, as a sanctuary city. It has a large pool of people who have significant agricultural experience. Our farm manager, she's a good example is our farm manager. She's from Nepal. She used to run a grocery store and a family farm when she was there. Multiple farmers that utilize our land access program manage large acreages, 40 to 150 in states like California and Texas. Being able to ensure that development in the urban core and the suburban perimeter, preventing that from extending out into more rural areas that are primarily reserved as farmland and as natural lands, kind of requires us to get more people out there to be stewards of the environment. There's a lot of concern out there now that the Conservation Reserve Program is going to get axed. So we really need to be making local efforts to focus on preserving land, not just for agriculture, but for natural lands as carbon sinks, as sources of maple syrup, as areas to forage for recreation, things like that. Thinking about preserving water quality and things like that. I mean, you can have an organic certified farm that is concentrated animal feeding operation. You can have a CAFO that is organic certified. So really just making sure that you advocate for people get together as a community and kind of advocate for the kind of agriculture that they want to see, where it's it's relatively low intensity, but it still has the capacity to be able to feed people in the region and outside of it. Central New York is really poised for becoming like the new Southern California of agriculture. There's a lot of really good prime agricultural soils. There's a lot of people with experience in the area, and just being able to kind of advocate for that approach to it is important on preservation for land, water, nature, food, fiber, and fuel.
Megan, can we hear your perspective on that as well?
So yeah, I was actually thinking to your point about the average age of 58 being the farmer. In Onondaga County, it's 65. Yeah. So yeah, so a couple points that I was pulling on the ag. So we just recently completed an ag and farmland protection plan for Onondaga County, and sort of just pulled out a couple of the findings from that. Our mid-sized farmers are sort of going away pretty significantly. It's all going very large-scale farming or very small scale. So the loss of that middle, I mean, sort of like the loss of the middle class, same dynamic. But yeah, a third of our farmers are over 65. We've got labor shortages. We're right now working on the regional market revitalization plan. They've got some issues over there that we're trying to fix. But yeah, a lot of the problem with getting more vendors at the farmers market is they don't have anybody to work. So they need folks that are willing to work to sell the product. We do a lot of looking at soil quality. We have fantastic quality soils for agriculture here in Onondaga County, some of the best in the nation. A lot of the soils that are great for vegetable growing. We have a lot of dairy farmers down in the southern end of the county. Our vegetable growers are up in the northern end of the county. That's where we're seeing the most demand for housing development and urban development and transition of those lands. So we're very conscious of losing our soils that are our food source very primarily to development. We're also seeing significant impacts from solar development. There's a huge wind development project being proposed for the southern suburbs right now as well. That may not really have as much ag impact as solar development is, but we've seen a huge loss of prime farmland and farmland soils to solar development. And once you start digging into those soils and compacting them and moving them around, you really lose a lot of the integrity of those soils, and you really can't get back that same quality. So even though they say, oh, it'll only be here for 30 years, it does impact the actual quality of the land. It fragments your farmland, and it does have some of those lasting effects of fragmenting sort of the concentration of agricultural land in certain areas. So we're spending a lot of time looking at that in terms of the ag community as well. Conflicts with rural development within our agricultural communities and sort of those conflicts. You mentioned CAFOs. That's been a big issue within our communities, and trying to balance the needs of farmers and balance the needs of folks that live out in these communities, and do that in a symbiotic way. But we're also seeing a lot of opportunities in agriculture, seeing a huge growth in agritourism. The county just put out a small grant program to agritourism operators in Onondaga County. We awarded, I think it was 58 projects, about $800,000 to agritourism operators. We got a huge response out of it, huge interest level from folks, and that's a great way for the farming community to sort of help offset some of the costs they have to stay in agriculture. It brings in a bit of a commercial use and feel to it, but I think the benefits to the agricultural component of their operation sort of outweigh some of those negatives as long as it's done in a balanced way. Yeah, we're focusing on land protection in ways that we never have before. Got great support from the state on that. We've protected over 12,000 acres of land through conservation easements on agricultural lands. Yeah, we're with bringing in folks like Agrana. We've got food processing and agribusiness opportunities, the dairy industry, really picking up on that and really focusing on that. We're looking at new opportunities at the regional market to play a role in the distribution of agricultural products and processing and value-added sort of things, working with the schools on local food and schools. So there's a lot of new opportunities emerging, and as Ryan mentioned, sort of the new populations coming into our communities that actually have that base in agriculture that we see as a real asset to our communities.
So coming back from rural area to the urban, I can see three interconnected questions that I can direct it to both you and Joe and Eric. So how do we grow in a way that makes it easier to live car-free or car-light? How do we ensure our new street networks are interconnected enough for supporting walkability, parking, transit? And then is mixed-use zoning being considered in a new development to allow for businesses on a street level and as residential on top level?
You want to take it first, or you want me to? I can go first.
Sorry, you seem so eager, Joe. Okay. So, I think I want to try not to repeat some of the things I covered. I think that, to the point about residential on top of a commercial and mixed-use development, right? That is exactly the kind of project that we want to be encapsulating within that as part of the new zoning code. So I think that, where in the vast majority of the city, there's certain areas where that's appropriate and that's allowed by right. There's the other areas where it may still be more residential in nature, but I think that's where we're really trying to target just some of these more legacy business corridors or in downtown, and that's exactly the kind of development that we want to be seeing. I mean, you think back, if you look at downtown Syracuse 10, 15 years ago, there was very minimal residential development, and now downtown Syracuse is our fastest growing neighborhood in terms of the growth in the number of residents. So I think that we are rethinking, particularly how new development is taking place, and mixed use is just one great example, and other communities have been doing this they caught onto this trend maybe faster than we did, but I think that we really are accelerating those types of diverse growth. And I think to just where the city goes from here, I think a key part of that is just going to be working closely with employers, but also really looking at how do we grow equitably. We haven't talked about brownfields on this panel, but here in the city of Syracuse, that industrial legacy, we have a lot of sites where there's a significant amount of contamination and cleanup, and that can directly impact the people who live or interact with these sites on a daily basis. So a lot of effort going into cleanup of these sites, taking advantage of state and federal programs that allow us to do that, but also really looking and reimagining these sites for new development opportunities and making sure that when you look at a brownfield, you look at a vacant site, I think looking at the character of the surrounding neighborhood is going to be a key part of that, as well as, maybe major infrastructure projects like I-81 and just reimagining what that entire corridor will look like in the future. So, Joe, that's like my segue to you, I guess.
Yeah, and some just simple practical things that we're looking at when you talk about walkability and connectivity, high-level suggestions that we've developed through the city's community grid vision plan is a lot of conversion of one-ways to two-ways. That's something that we had a lot of suggestion. A lot of the key artery streets in downtown Syracuse, if you want to talk about Warren Street, Montgomery Street, there's a ton of them that are one way that really make it an awkward experience, encourage higher speeds. And so converting a lot of those from one way to two way, really trying to slow them down, make them more attractive for development, for housing, for economic development. A lot of it is looking at opportunities to break up super blocks where you have these massive structures that look like, New York City level blocks in our small downtown that it just doesn't work. So ironically, a lot of that is returning the street grid to what it was pre-81. So just doing the city maps the way they were originally planned before we changed them all to fit the highway dynamic. So yeah, those are some of the things that we can do. Another one, like Eric was talking about, is we've really come a long way in the city. I see Owen Kearney was out in the audience earlier, but a lot of the zoning to make sure that we have some cohesion with building type, building size, building style, to make sure that these streets feel warm and feel connected. And a lot of the other suggestions, again, mentioned before, obviously public transportation is a huge part, but also, a lot of aesthetic design that we haven't talked about a lot is a simple but very effective way to increase the tree canopy in downtown Syracuse, improve the lighting, make it feel warmer, make it feel more welcoming. And so a lot of those are priorities as we look at things that, beyond just removing the artery, getting the design features and details right, to make it feel connected. I think, one of the things that always comes to my mind with the vision plan that we developed is they have identified about 100 acres of underutilized land right in the heart of downtown Syracuse that are currently, whether it be vacant properties or surface level parking lots or things that could serve a better purpose. And I think we have to get some of those design features right, the ones I just talked about, width of sidewalks, distance of buildings to street, design, tree canopy, all those things to make it feel really warm. And I think the city won't have to be the lead entity or the county to develop those 100 acres. I think if we get the details right and we set the framework right, that land will become valuable and the market will take care of the rest if we can get the framework and the guardrails right to guide the development in a way that's going to encourage the kind of growth we want to see.
Thank you both. While we are at it, I wanted to ask this question from you, Sean. So accessibility to school and safe access to school is an important and priority for the state, for our city. And I was wondering what are the tangible observations and impacts of having walkable, bikeable, safe transit to school and having community embedded schools in our community?
Yeah, so I think that we just need a lot more investment in public education in general in the entire country, particularly in places like the Syracuse City School District that are underfunded, understaffed, attendance is really low, graduation rates are low, expectations that teachers have for students are really low. So I think we just need more there across the board. So we need more from federal, state, and at local levels, a lot more. So that's one point that I want to highlight. Transportation is super duper important. I know there have been some fights around with this, getting the school buses to pick up students who live within, more than 2 miles. I mean, I think it was you had to live 2 miles away to get a bus for a while, and then there was some protests about that. Then it was 1.5 miles. I don't know if it's down to 1 mile yet, but there are kids in this district who are walking over 1 mile to school in the winter when it's 5 degrees outside, sometimes through different neighborhoods. This can be unsafe for a variety of reasons. It's often dark, especially after school. So that's a major issue. So we need more investment there to make sure that students have safe passage to school. And I think we've come a long way in the last decade on that, but that's something where we could do a heck of a lot better. So yeah, I also want to just mention a couple other things just about education and some of the issues with equity. So I think the fortunate thing is that we know a lot of things that work. I think sometimes when we're trying to solve inequality in education problems, we forget that a lot of things have worked in the past and we just need to go back to them or reinvest in them. There's also a lot of backlash to equality. There's a lot of people that don't want equality. They work really, really hard to prevent it. They like segregation. They like our racial stratification system. They don't want it to be different. They're enjoying the privileges that they have. They hold really negative stereotypes about other groups. We are surrounded by anti-Black racism, for example. So those things are really important, and I just want to acknowledge that, because sometimes it feels like, why can't we solve these problems? Well, there's a lot of people that don't want to solve the problems, or they actually want to make inequality get bigger, and they work really, really hard to do that. We saw that with the election last week. So I think that that's something that can't be discounted. Things like affirmative action work, full stop, period. Those have been wildly successful programs, which is why they've come under attack, because they've been so successful and the outcomes have been so good for students who have benefited from that, starting with the Civil Rights Act in '64, right? So for example, my parents went to college because of affirmative action policies that came out of the Civil Rights Act. It's the only reason why I'm able to sit up here today. So those sorts of policies really matter. They're not about giving people handouts who don't deserve it. They're about making sure that we're identifying talent and giving people opportunities to show what they can do who have been overlooked historically. So that's really what that's about. I think we need more partnerships between PTA groups. Sometimes you have school districts where there's a lot of inequality within the district, so PTAs can do joint fundraisers, have revenue sharing. There's a lot of inequality in parent-teacher organizations and how they're able to work for their schools or not able to do that. Also partnerships beyond the district level, so looking at a countywide level, more revenue sharing, fundraisers that are sort of spread evenly between a variety of different schools, so that there's not as much sort of opportunity hoarding where certain schools are sort of able to, literally and figuratively bank on, those sorts of fundraisers and revenue streams that they have that, other students don't have through no fault of their own. It's just the zip code where they live. We also need to connect students to businesses and to colleges. We need to have colleges coming into schools to talk to students about their school and some of the programs that are available. We need to start letting students know about college opportunities way earlier, like at elementary school. What is college? What does this look like? And then starting in 9th grade, we need to have college counseling available to every student starting in 9th grade. Materials being sent home, students having information sessions. A lot of times schools will start college counseling in 12th grade, which is way too late. And sometimes students don't realize that they're ineligible to even go to college because they didn't take a class sophomore year that they could have easily taken, and now they're 2 years too late. So we really have to do that. And then again, affordable housing, transportation, investing in public education and jobs programs. That's going to be really crucial in the next decade as this area in the whole region starts to develop more.
Thank you. We have a question among the audience.
Okay. So this is something I was appreciating, Dr. Drake, talking about kind of looking to the past. We kind of know what works and we know where we've messed up previously. And Drake has talked about a lot with education, and we talked a little bit about it regarding housing and like I-81. But I want to go back a little bit to housing developments and to rural developments. We know kind of the patterns of development when it comes to these large corporations often and large players coming in and pushing out local and typically advantageous to low-income communities, businesses, farms, and community projects. What can we take from where Syracuse has been left after the last 80 years to learn from those mistakes and prevent another slide after whatever happens with Micron and Intel and these different large industrial players happens in the next, let's say, 10 years? So I guess to summarize, what can we learn from the mistakes of the past 50 years in Syracuse, right? That has created these inequalities and frankly unaffordable and unsustainable developments. What can we do better this time?
We're at the end of our time, so let's hear the other question too and then answer it.
I'll try to keep mine short and sweet. We have the recent mixed-use development rezoning. We have the I-81 and the new business development that's going to happen around that. I need a civics 101 for the city. What would it take to remove parking minimums in order to allow businesses to develop in those areas?
Well, I think, so both questions were really, really good, so thank you for submitting them. I guess to your Civics 101 class. So we've seen communities, Buffalo is a most local example where they eliminated parking minimums altogether. I will say that I can't eloquently probably answer that question maybe the best in terms of that was not built into this specific zoning and land use ordinance. Now that being said, there was a significant amount of progress within our zoning code now in terms of those parking minimums. Specifically, there was additional measures taken that if you were on a transportation corridor, that was a pretty loose definition as well of what defines a transportation corridor. It could be a bus stop where Centro is operating, BRT, it could be opportunities where there's bike or scooter share. That can further reduce your parking requirements for a project. And so, I think that there's a spectrum in terms of what I would say is we had a very suburban style 1950s, 1960s style land use code. Not as recently as 18 months ago, we have now made a significant amount of progress in terms of what we require from not just parking, but overall design and really trying to disincentivize surface parking. So I guess the way I would just say it is sometimes progress can be incremental. I think that this has been a significant amount of progress in the right direction. Maybe we're not to the point of another city that's eliminated parking minimums altogether, but I think that this is where we are continuing to really look to quality, good design in the city of Syracuse. We are much further ahead than we were even within the last 2 years. To, I guess, the other question, in terms of like, what do we learn? I just think about how this community was just like so many others, and it was unsustainable growth where it was so much emphasis around sprawl. I credit, Megan and the work that the county is doing on comprehensive plans, but also looking at town center models. Obviously, I'm speaking for the city of Syracuse, so we are trying to focus on city growth, but we do look at there's some really incredible villages and town centers like Marcellus and like Camillus and like up in North Syracuse. Those town center models are where those types of growth should be incentivized, not in current rural undisturbed land in greenfields. And so that's, I think, what the county and the county executive is really communicating. And then at the city level, we were at one point a city of 225,000 people. Like, we had a significant amount of population, and we have a lot of that infrastructure to accommodate that future growth. So I think for us, it is here in the city of Syracuse, it's how do we take advantage of people that will be coming to this community, and how do we support the people that live here today? So I would just say that maybe compared to where we were 80 years ago, I think is the number you used, we're going to grow in this community. We are fully anticipating it. We're expecting it. Let's make sure we're growing sustainably.
Yeah, I would just jump on. I absolutely agree with everything Eric just said. Just to jump on the parking conversation as well. Taking away parking can be very terrifying for both the development community as well as municipalities as well as the public. It's a very hot topic, I swear. So I think one of the ways that you can't just take away parking requirements and think that it's all going to work. You have to make those other modes of transportation easy, attractive, attainable, non-intimidating. So creating streets that are hospitable to walking, biking, transit, all those things, investing in transit, incentivizing transit, all that good stuff is super important. Before you even get rid of the minimums, you've got to create the environment where the other modes can take precedence. Yeah.
Did I do it right? Did I do it right? Thanks. Great topic, large topic. Basic question between city and county, and this is going to come from a perception of our planning past in a city, suburban, two-world concept, which is our past. In other words, the evolution of suburbanization and the history of the city has left us with two worlds that I think is changing. what can your efforts now in local and regional development planning do to make this one collective effort for the different planning issues in a town or village center than a large city in its complexity? Mixed use is an answer in different ways in both, but the best of both is there's business on the street as a public environment. So I guess the question really is, how do you see the future becoming to get more holistic about the common benefits of planned development for equally for both sides? Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like in my career working with municipalities in the towns and villages, especially towns, I've absolutely begun to see an evolution in planning where we used to plan one way for the city and a different way for suburban communities. And we didn't have the expectations of suburban development that we had for our villages and our city centers. And I think that's actually starting to change. I think there's an embracing of the town center concept. There's an embracing of trying to create the quality communities. They're understanding some of the problems with the way things have been developed. The traffic safety issues that they have, the congestion issues are first and foremost in people's mind. The lack of trails and open space and recreational opportunities that a lot of the urbanized places are actually incorporating very well into their communities that they don't know how to start in the suburban communities. And they're like, wait, we don't have a town center. Like, why don't we have that? And these questions are now being asked in a way that I've never heard before, and it's really refreshing. The community surveys that are being done as part of comprehensive plans, they're asking for walkability and transit and higher density and different, they want accessory dwelling units, they want townhouses, they want condos, they want all this kind of stuff. They want, tree-lined streets. And I've never heard them ask for these things before, and now people are asking for them. So it's really refreshing.
I just want to be conscious on time. I don't know if do we.
That's true. Yeah, so we are past time. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.